They broke the ancient rule in the galaxy: never threaten humans. The message came through at 0300 station time, when the corridors of the Galactic Compact's diplomatic hub were empty, and the cleaning drones moved in quiet circles across the floors. I was asleep. I was not asleep for long. My name is Grix7. I am a Velhari diplomatic scribe. I have held this position for 22 years. In those 22 years, I have processed 41,000 incident reports, border disputes, resource claims, treaty violations, jurisdictional arguments, between species who had been arguing the same argument since before my species learned to read. I am, in the formal language of the Compact, a record keeper. I am telling you this so you understand what it means when I say that the message woke me from sleep, and I sat at the edge of my resting surface, and felt the kind of cold that has nothing to do with temperature. The message was 6 sentences long. It had been sent by Fleet Commander Das Urith of the Vorath Dominion to the nearest human diplomatic station, 17 light hours from the edge of Vorath territorial space. The Compact's automated relay system had flagged it under 9 different advisory categories before any living officer had read a single word. 9 categories. I have never seen a message flagged under more than 3. I read the message 4 times before I called my superior, High Arbiter Sen Val, who is a member of a species that does not have what humans would call a resting face, because their facial structure is not built for rest. He picked up immediately. He had already read it. He did not say anything for 11 seconds. I counted. Then he said, "File everything. Begin a formal incident record. Do not speak to anyone in the corridor about what you have read." I asked him why. He said, "Because the Vorath just broke the rule. I want to explain the rule to you before I go further, because if you are reading this as part of a standard Compact orientation package, there is a possibility you have only encountered it as a footnote, a historical curiosity, a line in the Behavioral Advisory Annex that old members recite and new members nod at without absorbing. It is not a footnote. The rule is this: never threaten humans. Not as a moral position, not as an act of diplomatic courtesy, as pure, documented, evidence-based survival logic. The Compact's institutional memory goes back 11,000 years. In that span, 17 distinct civilizations made the specific choice to threaten human lives, human territory, or human continuation as a species. They did it for different reasons. Some did it from genuine aggression. Some did it as a negotiating tactic. 2 of them, genuinely, did not believe the rule was real. They thought it was the kind of story old species tell to frighten young ones. Of those 17 civilizations, 4 still exist in any recognizable form. Of those 4, 3 exist because they reversed course within 48 hours of making the threat. The 4th exists because of a technical dispute over whether what they said constituted a threat, or merely a very aggressive opinion, and the Compact Arbitration Committee has been reviewing that case for 600 years without resolution. The others are archaeological sites, not conquered territories, not subjugated populations living under human rule. Archaeological sites. The humans did not want their planets, did not want their ships or their resources or their populations serving in labor roles. They wanted the problem solved, and they solved it, and they moved on with a tidiness that older Compact members will describe, if you ask them at the right moment with the right kind of drink in their hands, as the most unsettling thing they have ever witnessed. And the Vorath, who have 14 star systems and a military fleet that had, until 72 hours ago, made every species on their border extremely nervous, had just sent a human diplomatic station a message that contained the following sentence: "Resist, and we will burn your cradle world." The context: the Vorath had intercepted a human colony ship 3 weeks prior, standard Vorath expansion protocol, which is their way of saying they had boarded it, cataloged the humans on board as useful biological assets, and absorbed them into their labor distribution network. 43 humans. The Vorath had taken 43 people, assigned them identification numbers, put them to work in a processing facility on the outer edge of Vorath space, and then, because they were apparently not satisfied with the situation as it stood, sent a message telling the human government not to resist or their home planet would be destroyed. I pulled the Vorath Dominion's intelligence assessment from the Compact's shared database while I was walking to the office. It was 2 years old. It described the humans as a developing mid-tier civilization with 14 colony ships, a modest diplomatic presence, and no military posture that registered as a threat to any established power in the region. 14 colony ships. A modest diplomatic presence. I want you to understand that whoever wrote that report was not wrong about the numbers. They were wrong about what the numbers meant. The way someone standing next to a calm river is not wrong that the water looks quiet, before it doesn't. When I reached the office, Sain Val was already at his station. He had the Compact's historical advisory file open on his screen, specifically the subsection titled Civilizational Incidents Involving Human Populations. It is a long document. He had it open to the Draketh case. The Draketh Empire, 2,200 years ago by Compact Standard Calendar, controlled a cluster of 6 systems on the outer arm and had a navy that was, by the metrics of its era, genuinely impressive. They encountered a human mining operation on an asteroid in disputed space. They told the mining crew to leave. The mining crew left. Then the Draketh commander sent a message to the human government stating that any future encroachment into the region would be met with the destruction of the nearest human settlement. That is all he said. 1 sentence. 1 conditional threat. The humans said nothing in response. 12 years later, there was no Draketh Empire. There is a Draketh Archaeological Preserve. It is managed by a committee of 3 Compact members on a rotating basis. The ruins are beautiful, apparently. Species travel from considerable distances to study the architecture. I sat down across from Sain Val, and I looked at the file he had open and I said, "The Vorath High Council knows the rule." He said, "They know of it. They have decided it is a myth maintained by species who were defeated long ago and who now have a narrative interest in making their defeat sound inevitable." I thought about that. I said, "Do they know about the Draketh?" He said, "They believe the Draketh fell due to internal instability." There was a pause. "There was no internal instability." I said. "No," said Sain Val. "There was not." He closed the historical file and turned to me, and his expression was the one I had only seen on his face twice before in 22 years. Once during the Sulian border collapse, and once during the Minar crisis. The expression that meant he was not scared in the ordinary way, but in the structural way. The way you are scared when you realize the ground you are standing on has a fault line running through it. "File the incident," he said. "Every word, every timestamp. If someone asks you why you are being so thorough, tell them this is the most important document you will ever write." I asked him why. He said, "Because whatever happens next, someone has to have written it down first." The Vorath ambassador, a senior official named Brath Kell, attended the Emergency Compact Council session 3 days after the message was sent. He was not alarmed. He spoke for 40 minutes about the natural expansion of developing powers and the historical precedent for labor integration and the technical specifications of Vorath territorial claims in the sector. He used the word inevitable repeatedly. The human ambassador, a woman named Dr. Claire Osei, arrived 7 minutes after the session had already begun. She apologized for being late. She sat down. She had a container of something she called tea, and she drank it while Brath Kell was still speaking, not rudely, just steadily, the way a person drinks something warm when they have decided to be comfortable. When Brath Kell finished, the council chair asked if the human delegation wished to respond to the Vorath statement. Dr. Osei said, "We would like our people back." That was all. Brath Kell said, "The individuals in question are now integrated into Vorath labor systems. Their reassignment was conducted according to standard Vorath expansion protocol." Dr. Osei said, "Their names are on file with the Compact Registry. They are citizens. We would like them back." Brath Kell said, "This is not a matter for Compact arbitration. This is an internal administrative question." Dr. Osei nodded. She drank her tea. She did not raise her voice. She did not file an objection or a formal protest or an emergency injunction. She said, "Noted," and she left. An elder Compact counselor, a meth thrall named Voss, who was 312 years old and had personally witnessed 4 galactic tier conflicts and survived all of them through what she described as aggressive mediocrity, leaned across the table after Dr. Osei was gone and said to no one in particular, "We are watching something begin. We are watching something begin." Brathkel laughed. Voss did not. I was in the corridor outside the council chamber when Dr. Osei passed me. She was not walking fast. She was not looking at her communicator or conferring with her staff. She was just walking, with her empty tea container, at a pace that suggested she had somewhere to be, and was confident she had enough time to get there. I do not know why I said anything. I am a scribe. I keep records. I do not intercept ambassadors in corridors. I said, "Ambassador." She stopped. She looked at me. She had eyes that were calm, in a way that was not blank, in a way that was the opposite of blank, the way a very deep body of water is calm. I said, "The rule. The ancient advisory. Are you aware of it?" She said, "We have our own version of it." I asked what their version said. She said, "Don't take our people." Then she walked away. I stood in the corridor for a while after that. 3 days later, civilian human traffic in a 30 light-year radius around Vorath space dropped to 0. Not decreased. Not rerouted through alternate corridors. 0. Every human freighter, every survey vessel, every independent merchant, every courier and supply runner and traveling academic, all of them gone. The lanes were empty. The tracking stations that monitored that region of space sent automated alerts because the absence of traffic registered as a sensor anomaly. Something was wrong with the equipment, the alerts suggested. Nothing should be this quiet. Nothing was wrong with the equipment. I added the traffic data to my incident file. I did not sleep well that night. And I am Velhari. And we are not a species given to anxiety. We have 37 standardized protocols for managing uncertainty. I tried 4 of them. They did not help. The Vorath sent a second message to the human diplomatic station 8 days after the first. It was longer. It outlined territorial claims. It listed a timeline for formalized integration of the 43 humans into permanent labor status. It used language like resolution of status and administrative finalization. It ended by repeating the warning about the cradle world. The humans said nothing, not publicly, not privately, that any compact monitoring system could detect. The human diplomatic mission continued its normal schedule. Dr. Osei attended 2 trade meetings and a reception for a newly ratified member species. She shook hands. She had more tea. The Vorath Dominion, reading the silence as capitulation, began drafting a third message. I was reading the draft, which a compact intelligence contact had provided unofficially, when the border sensor alert came through. 1 human vessel had entered Vorath territorial space. 1. I pulled the sensor profile. I looked at it for a long time. Then I called Sane Val. He said, "I see it." I said, "It is 1 ship." He said, "Yes." I said, "The Vorath have 40 warships within response range of that position." He said, "Yes." I said, "What is it doing?" There was a pause. A long one. He said, "Going to collect." I sat at my terminal with the sensor data open, and I thought about the 43 names in the compact registry, and I thought about Dr. Osei saying, "Don't take our people," and I thought about the Draketh ruins that travelers visited from great distances because the architecture was beautiful. I started a new section of the incident file. The ship's name was registered in the compact transit database as the GSV Patience. I have thought about that name many times since. Patience. The Vorath fleet commander transmitted the standard intercept challenge, identified his vessel, demanded identification. The Patience responded, identified itself, gave its registry number, its origin point, its stated purpose. Stated purpose: recovery of registered citizens. The fleet commander, a senior Vorath officer named Grath Vel, transmitted back, "You are 1 vessel. You are in violation of Vorath territorial space. Withdraw or be removed." The Patience said, "We would like our people back, please." Grath Vel said, "You are 1 vessel." The Patience said, "Yes." Grath Vel said, "I have 40 warships available." The Patience said, "We know." There was a pause in the transmission record. 14 seconds. I have listened to that silence more times than I can count. Grath Vel said, "Is this a declaration of conflict?" The Patience said, "No." Grathvel said. Then what are you doing here with one ship? The patient said, collecting. I want to tell you what happened next in the sequence it happened, but the problem with the sequence is that it implies duration, and there was very little duration to speak of. The patients had technology on board that did not appear in any compact registry, any intelligence assessment, any shared database that the Vorath or any other member species had access to. It had systems that the Vorath sensor operators, when they finally filed their own reports, described using words that translated roughly as incomprehensible, and specifically as wrong, in a way that felt personal. 40 Vorath warships responded. They surrounded the patients in standard fleet intercept formation, which is a very effective formation and which requires a significant degree of coordination, and which the Vorath executed with precision that I, reviewing the tactical logs later, could only describe as professional. The patients sat in the center of that formation, and then it stopped sitting there and started doing something that the Vorath sensor logs recorded but could not categorize. I am a diplomatic scribe. I am not a weapons technician, or a physicist, or an engineer. I cannot explain in technical terms what the patients did to those 40 ships. I can tell you what the outcome was, because outcomes are the business of record keepers, and I am very thorough at my business. All 40 warships were disabled. Engines off. Weapons offline. Every system that was not essential to keeping the crews alive had been shut down from the outside, without boarding, without physical contact, without the patients firing anything that registered on the Vorath weapons detection systems, in a way those systems were built to understand. Not destroyed. Every one of them intact. Life support running. Every crew member alive. Disabled. The patients docked with the detention facility, where the 43 humans were being held. The docking took 11 minutes. The facility's security systems, like the warship systems, had been turned off before the patients asked for access. In the 32 minutes that followed, the patients' crew recovered all 43 humans. Each one was assessed. Medical care was provided where needed. Names were confirmed against the compact registry list. Names. Each one. Then the patients contacted Grathvel one final time. The people you took had names, it said. I have logged each one. You should know that. Then it left Vorath space. Grathvel transmitted an emergency message to the Vorath High Council. The message was 7 words. Request immediate authority to de-escalate. Now. The Vorath High Council, the same council that had called the rule an ancient superstition maintained by civilizations that could not admit their own failures, convened an emergency session that lasted 6 hours. The intelligence summary I received from that session was 3 words. What else is coming? That was the right question. It was, in fact, the only question that mattered anymore. And I filed it, word for word, at the top of the next section of the record. Because whatever was coming, someone needed to have written it down first. I was already working on the sections that followed. I did not stop working for 11 months. I requested access to the Compact's deepest historical archives 2 weeks after the patient's incident. The request required 3 separate authorization signatures and a formal declaration of research necessity, which is the Compact's way of making you prove you genuinely need to know something before it shows you things that might change how you understand the universe. Sainval signed all 3 authorizations himself, one after another, without pausing to ask why I needed them. He already knew why. The archives go back 11,000 years. Most of what is in them is exactly what you would expect. Trade records, boundary surveys, population counts, the minutes of meetings about things that no longer matter. History is mostly noise, in my professional experience. 41,000 incident reports, and perhaps 300 of them describe something that changed the actual shape of the galaxy. The human files are different. Not because they are more numerous, they are not. Humans have been a member of the Compact for less than 400 years, and 400 years is a short time by anyone's measure. The files are different in how they read. Most incident files read like incident files. They describe what happened, who was involved, what the outcome was. The human incident files read like weather reports. Not the kind of weather that is inconvenient, the kind that reshapes coastlines. I pulled the Draketh case first because it is the most well-known, the one that senior Compact members cite when they are trying to explain the rule to species who have just joined and are still deciding what to take seriously. The Draketh file runs to several thousand pages. The first 2,000 pages are politics, diplomacy, an escalating series of border incidents, the particular kind of arrogance that develops in civilizations that have not yet been seriously challenged. The next section is the human response. The human response section is 40 pages long. It covers 12 years. 12 years in which the Draketh Empire, one of the most militarily capable civilizations in that region of space, at that period in history, experienced a problem that did not get better, did not get worse, in the way a war gets worse, just became, steadily and without drama, impossible. The files do not describe battles in the way you might expect. There were engagements. There were moments when Draketh ships encountered human activity, and the outcomes of those encounters were filed under categories that the Compact's archival system had not had to use before, and has not had to use since. Then the Draketh stopped having a navy. Then the Draketh stopped having a government. Then the Draketh stopped being a going concern. The humans did not occupy their territory, did not install an administrative structure or extract resources or settle populations on Draketh worlds. They closed the file and went home. That is in the record. Literally in the record, a human Compact representative filed a closing statement on the Draketh matter that is 4 sentences long. The last sentence says, "The matter is resolved. We consider this closed." 4 sentences. For the end of an empire. I pulled 7 more files after that. The Colliery Supremacy, which had described humans as a nuisance species that would require management. The Minar Expanse, which had controlled 300 star systems and whose High Minister had, according to the record, referred to humanity as a pest problem at a state dinner, with 12 other heads of government listening. The Preth Collective, which had actually begun construction of what they called a containment perimeter around human space, a ring of monitoring stations designed to limit where humans could go and what they could do. The Minar Heritage Zone is one of the more popular archaeological destinations in this region of the galaxy. The ruins of the High Minister's palace are particularly visited. The Preth Collective's containment perimeter was never finished. The pattern across every file was the same, not identical in the details because history never repeats that precisely, but identical in the shape. The humans would go quiet. Civilian traffic would disappear from the affected region. No counter threats. No emergency mobilization broadcast. No declaration of intent. And then, after an interval that was never the same twice but was always measured in months rather than years, the problem would be solved. Solved is the right word. Not defeated. Not crushed. Not conquered. Solved, the way an equation is solved, the way a malfunctioning system is repaired, with a specificity and an economy of means that the archive writers kept reaching for words to describe and kept falling short. One writer, a Velhari like me who had worked in the archives 800 years ago, had written a note in the margin of the Colliery file. I found it when I was cross-referencing case summaries. It was not an official annotation. It was a personal observation, the kind that gets written at the end of a long day when the facts have done something to you that you have not yet processed. It said, "They do not get angry. I have read every communication, every transmission. They do not perform anger or grief or fear. They perform arithmetic." I sat with that for a long time. I thought about the patience, sitting in the center of 40 warships, saying yes, when Grathvel told it that he had 40 ships available. Just, yes. No threat, no counter-display, not even emphasis. Yes. Because it was not information they needed to hear. It was information they already had already incorporated, had already accounted for. I filed a request through the Compact's Academic Liaison Office for a meeting with a human subject matter expert. The process normally takes 3 weeks. It took 4 days, which meant someone on the human side was already expecting the request. The expert they sent was a historian named Dr. Abby Lorne. She was in her late 60s, I estimated by human aging standards. She had short gray hair and wore clothing that suggested she had packed for a working trip rather than a diplomatic one, and she arrived with her own beverage in a container she had apparently brought from home. It smelled like the tea Dr. Ose drank at the council session. We met in one of the small conference rooms on the 3rd level of the Compact hub. She sat across from me and put her container on the table and looked at my files with the mild interest of someone who had read most of them already. I introduced myself. I explained my role and the purpose of my inquiry. She said, "You want to know why we don't threaten back?" I said, "Yes." She said, "Because threats are for people who are not sure they can do it." She said it the way you say something that is so obvious to you that the act of saying it out loud is slightly surprising. Not unkind, just matter of fact. I asked her to explain the pattern I had found in the archives, the silence, the disappearance of civilian traffic, the interval, the resolution. She thought about it for a moment. She drank her tea. She said, "When someone threatens us, there are two things we have to figure out. What is the minimum necessary response, and how long will it take to build it? The silence is the building period. The civilian traffic reroutes because we do not want uninvolved people in the area when the response happens." I said, "The responses in the historical record are not minimum by any ordinary definition." She said, "No, but they are minimum necessary. The minimum to ensure the problem does not happen again. We don't build more than that." I asked her about the patience. She said, "The patience was enough for the 43. If there had been 430, we would have sent something else." I asked her what something else would look like. She looked at me, and her expression shifted in a way I could not fully read, because Velhari and humans do not share enough biological history for me to read every register of a human face. She said, "You do not want to find out, and I say that as someone who hopes very much that you never have to." I wrote that down. I write everything down. It is what I do. Then I asked her the question I had been holding since the beginning of the session, the one that was not for the record but that I had to ask anyway. I said, "What is going to happen to the Vorath?" She was quiet for a moment. She looked at her container. She said, "The Vorath took 43 people, called them property, threatened 8 billion more, said they would burn the planet those 8 billion people grew up on." She picked up the container, did not drink from it. She said, "We are going to make sure that never happens again." I said, "What does that mean precisely?" She said, "It means the Vorath will not do it again." A pause. "Because they will not have the capacity," she said, "or because they will not want to. We would prefer the second option. We are going to give them the opportunity to choose." I asked her how long they had to choose. She said, "They already know. The border deployment is the message." I had not told her about the border deployment. The 107 vessels that had appeared on the Vorath perimeter in the weeks following the patient's incident, sitting there, without broadcasting, without moving, without doing anything at all except existing at the edge of Vorath space, like a geological feature that had always been there, and was not going anywhere. She had not needed me to tell her. "Do you think they will choose correctly?" I asked. She said, "We think so. They are not stupid. Arrogant, yes. Dangerously so. But not stupid, and the patients gave them a demonstration that we think clarified the situation." I said, "It disabled 40 warships." She said, "It disabled 40 warships without destroying them." That was the message. That was the loudest part of the message, actually. I thought about that. I said, "You chose not to destroy them." She said, "We chose not to destroy them yet. That is a distinction. We wanted them to understand that the choice not to destroy them was a choice, not a limitation." The room was quiet for a moment. She picked up her container and finished the last of her tea. "The Vorath have a word," she said, "that translates roughly as unbeatable. They use it to describe themselves in their military literature, have used it for 600 years. It is in their national songs." She stood up to leave. "They are going to need a new word," she said. She left. I sat in the empty conference room with my files open. I thought about the Draketh file, the 40 pages covering 12 years, the 4-sentence closing statement. I thought about what comes after an empire decides it needs a new word for itself. I thought, this is the most important thing I will ever write down. Then I opened a new section of the record, and I started writing. There is a particular kind of silence that fills a room when everyone in it knows something, and no one is saying it. I have sat in many rooms in my 22 years as a compact scribe. I have sat in rooms during border crises and resource disputes, and the kind of prolonged legal arguments that outlast the original parties and get handed down to their successors like furniture. I know the sound of rooms where people are negotiating. I know the sound of rooms where people are afraid but trying not to show it. The compact emergency session, 4 months after the patient's incident, sounded like neither of those things. It sounded like the Vorath processing something. Not their voices. They were present, the ambassador and his staff, taking up their usual positions at the long table. But the Vorath delegation had changed in a way that was hard to quantify and impossible to miss. Brathkel, who had filled 40 minutes with the word inevitable at the previous session, who had radiated the specific kind of contempt that comes from believing your power is permanent and your position is settled, sat in his chair with an expression that had been wrung out of its original shape. He still had the posture. The posture takes longer to go. But his eyes moved differently. His eyes moved the way eyes move when someone has spent the last 4 months looking at sensor data they cannot explain, and projections that their own systems keep flagging as errors, and waking at night to check the border feeds, because the 107 vessels were still there, still quiet, still not doing anything, which was somehow worse than anything they could have done. I was in the observer gallery above the council chamber. I am always in the observer gallery. I am the record keeper. I watch. Dr. Osei came in on time for this session. She sat down. She had her tea. The council chair opened the session and asked if the Vorath delegation wished to present a statement. Brathkel stood. He spoke for 5 minutes. I am going to tell you what he said in my own words, because the formal translation is in the record, and the formal translation is accurate, but it does not capture what the room felt like while he was saying it. He said that the Vorath Dominion wished to re-examine the status of the 43 individuals previously absorbed into Vorath labor systems. He said that the Dominion was prepared to discuss reparative measures. He said that the Dominion was prepared to enter formal arbitration on the question of territorial boundaries in the relevant sector. He said the Dominion was prepared to acknowledge that certain actions taken by Vorath personnel had been premature and had created complications that the Dominion wished to address through appropriate channels. He sat down. Premature, and created complications. 11 months of history, 40 warships, a civilization that had called the rule a superstition, 43 people taken from a ship and given numbers. Premature and created complications. I wrote it down. Dr. Osei said, "We appreciate the Vorath Dominion's willingness to engage. We have some conditions for the arbitration process." She put a document on the table. She had apparently brought it with her, prepared in advance, which meant the humans had already decided what the Vorath were going to say before the Vorath said it. The conditions were as follows. All 43 individuals to be returned to compact custody within 30 days, in good health, with full documentation of their time in Vorath facilities, full reparation for damages, assessed by an independent compact committee, a formal acknowledgement, submitted to the compact registry, that the seizure of the colony ship had violated 3 sections of the compact charter and 1 provision of the bilateral navigation agreement between Vorath and human space, the withdrawal of all Vorath military assets from the region of the original incident, and a standing agreement to be registered with the compact and reviewed annually, that Vorath expansion activities would not occur within a specified boundary of human colonial territory. Brathkel read the conditions. He did not argue about any of them. He said, "We will need to consult with the High Council on the timeline for certain elements." Dr. Osei said, 30 days on the return of the individuals. We are flexible on the other timelines. She picked up her tea. Within reason, she said. The session lasted another hour. I took notes on all of it. But the essential shape of what happened was established in those first 15 minutes. The Vorath had decided they would prefer to have a future, and the humans had decided to allow them one, and the terms of the arrangement were being worked out with the brisk efficiency of people who have agreed on the important part and are now dealing with logistics. What I want to tell you about, though, is what happened in the corridor after the session ended. I was coming down from the gallery, and I passed the Vorath ambassador's delegation in the hallway, and I passed the 2 members of the human diplomatic team who were walking back toward their offices, and then I passed a small side corridor where a young Vorath official was standing with his communicator, typing something, and I heard him speaking quietly to himself in his own language. "My translator is very good," he said. "We could have avoided all of this." He was not talking to me. He did not know I was there. He was just a young official who had spent the last several months inside a government that was trying to navigate its way back from the edge of something it had not fully understood. when it walked toward it. He said, "We could have just not done it." Then he went back to typing. I continued down the corridor. 3 weeks after the session, a Vorath transport delivered 43 humans to the compact transit station at the edge of the disputed sector. They arrived in good health. Each one was received by a compact medical team and a human consular representative. Each one was interviewed for the record. I read all 43 interviews. Most of them are in the record exactly as given. Factual, describing conditions and events. Several of them include the particular kind of exhaustion that comes from having been somewhere you did not choose and having gotten out. One of them, the interview with a woman named Sarah Otieno, an agricultural engineer from a colony called New Enugu, stayed with me in a way that the others, factual and clear as they were, did not. The compact interviewer asked her how she felt when the patients docked with the facility. She said, "Relieved and sorry." The interviewer asked why sorry. She said, "Because I knew what was coming for them, for the Vorath. Even in the facility, we talked about it. About what was coming, and even after everything they did, after the numbers and the facility and the way they talked to us, it is hard to watch something not know what is coming for it." She paused. She said, "One of the guards was young, barely grown. He was not unkind. He did not know. He was just doing what he had been told." She looked at the interviewer. She said, "I hope he found somewhere to be when it happened." I closed the interview file. I thought about the young Vorath official in the corridor, saying we could have just not done it to no one in particular. I thought about what the word mercy looks like when it is practiced by people who are simultaneously furious and disciplined and precise, who can disable 40 warships without losing a single life, and who will do what is necessary and nothing beyond it, and who apparently spend the rebuilding period worrying about whether a young guard made it out. I added Sarah Otieno's interview to the standing advisory section of the record. I added a note beside it that said, "This is the part that should make you the most careful. Not the 40 warships, not the 107 vessels on the border, not the Drakith ruins or the Minar heritage zone or any of the evidence in the 11,000 years of archive material. A woman who had been taken from her ship and given a number by people who did not see her as a person, looking at the camera during a compact intake interview, saying she hoped a young guard who had not been unkind had found somewhere to be. That is the part. That is what the rule is protecting you from needing to understand from the receiving end." I added the note. I kept writing. The Reparation Committee met for the first time 6 months after the council session, and I attended as the official compact record keeper, which meant I sat in the corner and wrote things down while 4 compact arbitrators and 3 Vorath legal officials and 2 human representatives worked through the details of what the Vorath Dominion owed and how it would be paid. I want to be honest, the meetings were not exciting. They were the ordinary machinery of resolution, and resolution, unlike the events that make it necessary, is mostly paperwork and calendar management. The Vorath officials were cooperative. More than cooperative, actually. They had the demeanor of people who have looked carefully at their options and have found that only one of them leads somewhere they want to go. The human representatives were pleasant and specific. Every number they put on the table was documented. Every claim was cross-referenced against the compact registry, the navigation agreement, and the incident record that I had been building since the night the original message woke me from sleep. My incident record was referenced in the proceedings 47 times. I counted. At one point, during a recess on the 4th day, one of the Vorath legal officials, a methodical older man named Vreth Sal, came and sat in the chair beside mine in the corner. He had a cup of something warm. He sat with it for a moment, without speaking. Then he said, "You have the most complete record of this incident of any document in the compact registry." I said, "It is my job to be thorough." He said, "I have reviewed it. All of it. The history section is very thorough as well." I said, "The history is relevant to understanding the current situation." He said, "Yes, we understand that now." He was quiet for a moment. He looked at his cup. He said, "We had the same historical record available to us. We had access to everything you accessed. The Draketh file, the Minar file, all of it." I said, "I know." He said, "We concluded it was a narrative told by the defeated to explain their defeat in a way that did not require them to admit their own failures. I thought about how to respond to that. I said, "That is a reasonable interpretation if you have not done the primary research." He said, "We had not done the primary research." He stood up and adjusted his formal jacket. He said, "We are doing it now." The meetings concluded 3 weeks later. The agreement was signed. It was registered in the Compact's permanent treaty record. The Vorath officials were efficient and correct throughout. There were no incidents. On the last day, as the session formally closed, the human representative, a young man named Owen Park who had been quiet and precise throughout the entire process, stood up to give the formal closing statement on behalf of the human government. He said, "The human government considers this matter closed. We appreciate the Compact's facilitation of this process. We appreciate the Vorath Dominion's willingness to engage constructively with the resolution." He paused. He said, "The 43 individuals who were taken from their ship are home. Each of them had names. Each of them had people who were waiting for them. We would like the record to note that." He sat down. The Compact chair noted it for the record. I noted it in my record. I noted everything. What happened after, in the months that followed, was quiet. Not the silence before something quiet of the civilian traffic disappearing and the border watch vessels appearing. The ordinary quiet of a situation that has been resolved and is being allowed to settle. The 107 vessels on the Vorath border were gone by the time the reparation agreement was signed. I had been watching them on the border feed every morning as a habit, the way you keep checking a weather system even after it has moved on, just to be sure. One day they were there, the next morning they were not. No announcement, no withdrawal ceremony, just gone. The Vorath border sensors, which had been monitoring the vessels with what I understood, from Vreth Sal's comment during the recess, to be a fairly continuous and sleepless attention for most of that period, registered their absence. I later read a summary of the internal Vorath intelligence assessment of the withdrawal. The assessment was brief. It had been written by a senior Vorath analyst named Keth Vral, who had apparently been the person responsible for watching those vessels since they appeared. The assessment said, in its entirety, they have left because they have decided to leave, not because they had to. This distinction should be understood. Keth Vral had been doing primary research. Good. What I want to tell you about, in this final section of what has become the longest incident record I have ever produced, is a conversation I had with San Val on the evening the reparation agreement was signed. We sat in his office, which is a small room with a window that faces the interior garden of the Compact hub, where something that is not quite grass and not quite anything else grows in a color that I have been looking at for 22 years and have never fully decided on. We had, at his suggestion, cups of something warm, though neither of us was doing much drinking. He said, "How is the record?" I said, "Complete." He said, "Good." He looked out the window. He said, "I have been in this position for 50 years. I have seen a great deal. I have managed my own understanding of what is possible, and what is permanent, and what kinds of power actually matter in a galaxy with this many kinds of people in it." He turned away from the window. He said, "I want to tell you what I have concluded, and I want you to write it down." I opened my file. He said, "There are species in this galaxy that are strong because they are large. Species that are strong because they are old. Species that are strong because they have resources or technology or political reach. These are real strengths, and they determine a great deal about how the Compact functions." He paused. He said, "The humans are not the largest or the oldest or the most resourced. They are not the most technologically advanced by any single metric. What they are is the only species I have ever observed that does not have a gap between what they say and what they do. When they say they will do a thing, the thing is already being built. The silence between the statement and the action is not hesitation, it is construction." I wrote it down. He said, "The Vorath thought the silence was weakness. Every species that has ever made that mistake is in the archive. None of them as a going concern." He picked up his cup. He said, "Write that down too. All of it. Put it at the top of the standing advisory. Make it the first thing every new Compact member reads." I said, "I will." He said, "Good." He drank. We sat there for a while, in the small office with the window facing the not quite grass, and it was quiet in the way that comes after something large has moved through, and the landscape is still settling. Then I went back to my desk and I wrote the final section of the record. I wrote it the way I try to write everything, accurately, completely, without embellishment. The record does not need embellishment. The facts are remarkable enough on their own. The summary assessment is the last part of any incident record, and I have written 41,000 of them, and they are all more or less the same form. I state what happened. I state what was resolved. I state the outcome and any ongoing obligations. This one took me longer than usual. I wrote, "The Vorath Dominion transmitted a threat to the human government and seized 43 human citizens from a colony vessel. The rule, which is documented in the Compact's Historical Advisory Database and has been in force in some form since the earliest records of human participation in galactic affairs, was violated. The violation was resolved through a combination of direct action by the human government and subsequent diplomatic arbitration facilitated by the Compact. The 43 citizens have been returned. Reparations have been agreed. A standing agreement, restricting Vorath expansion near human territory, has been registered. The Vorath Dominion still exists. This should be understood as a deliberate outcome. The human response was calibrated to produce resolution, not elimination. The historical record contains 17 prior incidents of this category. In most of them, the offending civilization does not appear in later records as a functioning entity. The Vorath do. They should understand that they are here because the humans chose for them to be here, in the same way the patients chose to disable 40 warships rather than destroy them. The choice is real. The capability to have chosen otherwise is also real. The rule is not a story. It is not old wisdom maintained by civilizations that wish to appear important. It is the compression of 11,000 years of evidence into a single instruction. Do not threaten humans. Not because they will lose their temper. They will not. Not because they will panic or retaliate in the way that large, frightened things retaliate. Because they will solve the problem. They will solve it with arithmetic. They will calculate what is necessary, build exactly that, use it precisely, and then file a closing statement that is 4 sentences long and says the matter is closed. And the matter will be closed. The Vorath are learning a new word for themselves. I do not know what word they will find. But I know that it will not be the old one. And I know that the moment they said resist, and we will burn your cradle world, the old word stopped being accurate. This record is submitted as a standing advisory to all Compact member species and all civilizations undergoing the orientation process for potential membership. Read it. All of it. Then read the Draketh file. Then understand that the Draketh file exists because the Draketh did not read anything carefully enough. The rule exists for a reason. The reason has been documented 11,000 years of times. Never threaten humans. Not ever. Not even once. I saved the file. I closed my terminal. I went home. I slept without waking once. It was, after 11 months of poor sleep and morning border checks, and the specific, sustained kind of unease that comes from watching something enormous move through the world and not knowing where it will land, the best sleep of my professional life. The record existed now. Every word of it. And if anyone in this galaxy ever needed to understand what they were about to do before they did it,